All right, so my name is Robert DeRamo, otherwise known as Bobby, and I'm a PGY1 pharmacy resident. Today, we're going to be talking about the ASHP Pharmacy Forecast 2018. There's a 50% chance of sun, rain, uncertainty, and change. So a little bit about what we're going to cover today. We're going to describe current and future changes in healthcare and how they impact health system pharmacy. We're going to explain what the pharmacy forecast is. We're going to evaluate the pharmacy forecast survey results. We're also going to assess and devise strategies on how to position the health system in a place of success in an ever-changing healthcare landscape. So as we all know, healthcare is changing. With that, we can note because the GDP, or gross domestic product, is increasing exponentially. And what that really means is that by 2025, they estimate that about 20% of all dollars will go towards healthcare, which is an exorbitant number and exorbitant amount of money. The increasing chronic disease burden in Americans is another trend that's driving healthcare change, as well as rising drug costs and rising prescription use. So with this graph, if you look in between 2015 and 2020, we're about at 48%, and the 48% indicates that that is how much of the American population has at least one chronic condition. So that's essentially saying that about half of the population has at least one chronic condition, which is a significant statistic. What I want you to gather from this graph is you can look at all the different lines, but really if you look at the total line, the black line going up, the cost of prescriptions has gone up, is what I'm trying to get at with this graph. And this article goes into the nitty-gritty of why that is. But if you put a trend line on that line, you would see that it's got its dips and curves, but exponentially it's going up. So with this graph, this is the 30-day use that they measured. And really what I want you to take away from this, if you look at the bottom right in the red circled boxes, you can see that about 25 years ago, in 65 years and older patient populations, there was only 13.8% of those people who had 5 plus more drugs as part of their medication regimen. Fast forwarding 25 years, or current day, 2014, you can take that same patient population, 65 years and older, and now there's 42% of patients who have 5 plus more drugs. So a significant increase in the amount of medications for that age group. So looking at this slide, really what I wanted to get at, what I wanted you guys to understand from this is from Becker Hospital Review. And really this is what the C-suite looks at. It is a tool where it looks at the overall trends of healthcare, not just pharmacy, but the overall trends of healthcare and health systems, and where it's going in the near future. And so if you just pick out 3 of these, so let's say healthcare reform, pharmacy benefit managers, and the opioid crisis, what you'll see is all 3 of those things fit into what we need to care about as pharmacists in the pharmacy department, and what the pharmacy forecast has focused on. And really, if you go through all 12 of these, they all incorporate into the same trends that we're going to talk about that are pharmacy specific. So the pharmacy forecast, what is it? It's basically a strategic planning advice that is put together through by thought leaders, by the ASHP Foundation. And really what it is a report that is established through surveys and trends, and they are able to basically put together what are the trends of 2018 and how can we predict and put into place a set of basically a plan to improve effectiveness of health system pharmacy leaders by helping them plan for the future. So trends that help us predict the future, more or less, is what the pharmacy forecast is. And these are the 8 areas that they decided to pick as the 8 emerging trends for 2018. And we're going to go into all these in more detail. And just to so everybody's on the same page, the report that I have back there, it goes in order of all these trends. So you can follow along, everything's in order. So as far as therapeutic innovation, the impact of precision medicine, the first emerging trend. So the Precision Medicine Initiative is a long-term research endeavor involving the NIH, or National Institutes of Health, and multiple other research centers, which aims to understand how a person's genetics, environments, and lifestyles can help to determine the best approach to prevent or treat disease. So what really drove this? There was governmental drivers, such as under the Barack Obama legislature, they launched the PMI initiative. There was also something called the 21st Century Cures Act under the same legislature. So something else that's driving forward the impact of precision medicine is new molecular entities. So really, what is that talking about? That's talking about the new targeted therapies that are coming about and all the biologics. I've spent quite some time in the oncology world over the last 10 weeks in inpatient, outpatient, and I can tell you that there are targeted therapies that are coming to the market at a very fast rate. And so we'll talk more about what that really means. There's also some incredible technology that isn't, it's in the pipeline. It's not yet approved, but it's called CRISPR, which stands for Clustered Regularly Interspaced Short Palindromic Repeat. And what this is technology that can basically sequence your genetic genome, or your genome very quickly, something that we haven't seen before in the past. As far as the 21st Century Cures Act, really what this was, in 2016, it was a law that was passed to accelerate drug discovery and development. And there was $6.3 billion allowed to the NIH to try and ramp up that initiative. So as far as the survey results, we're not going to go through every single question, but we will pick out certain questions where I'll poll the audience. But every question is in your pamphlet if you want to read them as we go along. But the overarching question that they'll ask is, forecast panelists' response to question, how likely is it that the following will occur by the year 2022 in the geographic area where you work? And then they'll ask specific questions, with that being the umbrella question. So if we look at these three questions, basically the first question I want to poll the audience, and the rest I'm just going to go over key points. So how many people in the crowd believe that sorry, that's really small on this computer screen. The annual number of new molecular entities will grow by double by 2022. So how many people, just raise of hands, how many people think that the molecular entities and biologics, that those will double in the next 4 years? Okay. So I'd say probably a little more than half. And if you look at the results, that's exactly what happened, is that basically thought leaders believe that, a majority of thought leaders believe that molecular entities will grow in the next 4 years by at least double. The other main points were that patients, insurers, and manufacturers have to pay for meds under the Right to Try Act, which we'll talk about in the next slide if you haven't heard of the Right to Try Act. And then the FDA efficacy requirement will be fulfilled via small-scale targeted trials versus randomized trials. And really what this stems from is the 21st Century Cures Act, and we'll talk more about that in the next slide as well. So looking at strategies to make sure that we're in a good place to basically endure these new changes, pharmacists must be precision medicine experts. So I can't speak for every division, but I have spent some significant amount of time with oncology, and I will say that the oncology pharmacists are very much the precision medicine experts on the team. They develop the protocols and the chemo regimens, and basically are able to answer any questions that the physicians might have and really understand where these new molecular entities are going to have their place in therapy. And so that's really what we want to do, is we want to be able to be that expert when these new medications come out, to understand where their place is in therapy and how we can get our patients access to them in a cost-effective manner. As far as the Right to Try Act, if you haven't heard of that, basically the 21st Century Cures Act promoted drug development, and then we had the Right to Try Act, which is basically the unrestricted experimental use in patients with no standard of care options yet, or options left. So when there's nothing else to try, can we use experimental drugs in these patients that maybe isn't FDA approved or isn't out on the market yet or is still in clinical trials? There's a lot of ethical debate around this area, but really what the forecast was talking about is, as an institution, you have to have policies that say we are for this or we aren't for this, and we're not quite there yet. As far as EHR quality, or electronic health record quality documentation, and basically what this is talking about is, with the 21st Century Cures Act, you're going to have medications that are coming to market at a much faster rate than we're traditionally used to. So usually we have these large, robust, randomized clinical trials. and we're able to really understand what that medication is going to do, safety, efficacy, and all that goes in with that. Now we're going to have medications that come to market, and on the back end, we're going to have to prove that they're safe and effective. That's going to change things a little bit. And because of that, we might have to be in a place to be able to produce data to show that our medications are safe and effective for our patients. So what are we doing at UVA? We have partnered with the Inova Health System for a precision medicine partnership where we are promoting science and precision medicine to improve health by recruiting the best and the brightest in areas of research, scientists, and investigators. And really, to dive a little bit deeper, the collaborative research focused on genomics, functional biology, bioinformatics, biologically driven engineering, translational research, development of targeted therapeutics, and commercialization of new drug discoveries. And then that's a quote from our president here, just promoting and being an advocate for that collaborative. So the first question I want to ask you guys is, and you can just raise of hands, the 21st Century Cures Act is designed to help accelerate medical product development and bring new innovations and advances to patients who need them faster and more efficiently. If you think that's true, raise your hand. Okay, we got about 4 people that got it right, but it's good. I'll take it. The next thing we want to talk about is the future of data analytics and information technology. So really jumping into this, obviously we have technology implementation to drive patient care. Here at UVA, if you think back 15, 20 years ago, we didn't have barcode scanning, even shorter than that. So just the fact that we have barcode scanning is an incredible technology that has come about. When you look at Pyxis ES, when you look at our electronic health record and Epic Phase 2, and just everything that Epic's been able to do for us as clinicians and help our patients, everything from those things to having a drone that we recently acquired. People laughed at that 2 years ago. They still laugh at that. But the point is, we're trying to push the limits on technology implementation, and along those same lines, we are able to drive patient care forward with those things. Another thing they talk about is insurance companies and how they're giving beneficiaries incentives to be healthy. And so the Be Well program is a perfect example of this. If you link your Fitbit or your Apple Watch to an app that the health plan provides, you can count your steps, and then at the end of a couple of months, you get some bonus. So in our case, it's a couple $100 into a paycheck in February for the fall, and then again in the spring. And so really, it's just a collaborative approach to keep people healthy. As far as artificial intelligence, what that is it's statistics, it's statistical methods applied to large data sets. And where does it have a place in pharmacy? It's yet to be determined. But basically what this is referring to is that we have certain tasks that are very time intensive, and can we have some type of artificial technology that can do those tasks while we have more time for direct patient care services? The flip side of that is what people tend to talk about is verification. And so when is it appropriate for a computer to do verification versus more high acuity orders that would need a pharmacist to really dive into different areas? So artificial intelligence is a double-edged sword, and it's not quite there yet, but it's just something to think about the future. So as far as key points for these 4 questions, and again, if you want to read them, they're in the pamphlet in front of you. But the key points for them are most insurance companies will provide incentives to patients via wearables, and that's something that we've already talked about and something that most of us in this room, I think, are signed up for or at least are aware of through the Be Health program. About a quarter of health systems will employ AI to guide therapeutic decision making. So I think what this is really speaking to is drug-drug interactions and things like that are already in place, not necessarily going over through the verification process, but more of that DUR. As far as the next question, it deals with the fact that most health systems will employ non-pharmacists for data analysts, architecture, and information management. So we do both here at UVA. So we have people that work as analysts and help us with our data, but we also have our wonderful pharmacy IT department that we depend on. And so really with both combined, we're able to really be innovative, and I feel like we're ahead of the curve in many areas in the IT department because we have a good mix of that professional background. As far as health systems, they will undergo EHR redesign to manage medications across the continuum of care. So what they talk about is having the ability to handle transitions of care effectively within your EHR. I think that we're getting there. There might be some tweaks that we need to make to the EHR currently, or some modules, but overall, if you look at how we can use the ambulatory care setting and then the inpatient care setting and switch between the EHR and Epic, it's pretty amazing how you're able to really understand where that patient was within the healthcare system, at least if they went to any type of UVA clinic. So some strategies, we kind of talked about the technology implementation, what we're doing here at UVA. Developing new methods for interacting and monitoring patients. What they go into detail about there is how can we have an impact in telehealth. So they talk about how can you have maybe something like an app on the phone where the patient is able to contact their pharmacist or able to speak to their pharmacist. How can we get reimbursed for that? How can we really make an impact in this new telehealth field that's emerging? And that's something that we need to think about. As far as applying principles of AI to offload routine analytical work, we kind of talked about that. It's not quite there, but if you think about AI for different things such as drug interaction things, that we already have that currently. And then identify and implement useful predictive modeling for pharmacists. So this is really talking about, they use an example about opioid patients or high-risk opioid patients. How can we have systems that extrapolate information from an electronic medical record and throw that patient into a different queue that says, these are your high-risk patients, this is what you should focus on. I think there are softwares that do some of that, but I don't know if it's quite there to the point where we would want it, where it would actually be able to extrapolate it into a useful manner. So the next thing we want to talk about is the future business of pharmacy. So, I know that healthcare is a little different in the fact that our product is patients, and so it's quite different than your other industries. But at the end of the day, it is a business, and so it's something that we need to be aware of and making sure that we're really being innovative. So as far as the first thing to talk about, ambulatory care expansion. So at UVA, we have established a specialty pharmacy in the last couple of years, which has really been great for our patients as far as access to medications and being able to afford those medications, but it also has brought in an exorbitant amount of revenue for the pharmacy department, for the health system as a whole. Furthermore, we have opened a 24-hour outpatient pharmacy, the ERC, which is the only one in Charlottesville, and that entire footprint has allowed for meds to beds and other programs that have development from that. We have a footprint in the second bullet here, which ties into the first one, which is being able to be reimbursed under CPAs or collaborative practice agreements. Currently, to the best of my knowledge, we have at least one of those in the family medicine arena, where you're able to actually get reimbursement through that. And I think this is something that we have a lot of kind of unwritten CPAs, in my opinion, where you have the pharmacists really being integrated to the point where they put orders in and they have a great physician or great physician-pharmacist rapport, but maybe it's just not set in stone to the point where we're able to be reimbursed. And so maybe that's something to think about going forward. And then strategies for developing PBM services. What this talks about is basically, if you think about our PPMA-P team or pharmacy patient medication assistance program. So having programs in place to be the liaison between the patient and the insurance company or the PBM to make sure that our patients have access to medications, they understand the forms they need to fill out, and really being able to bridge that gap. And that's just one example. As far as innovations in supply chain development, something else they talk about, so this is really understanding how we can outsource some of our products. So PharMEDium is a perfect example of that. We don't make all sterile products in-house. We outsource things that make sense financially and that work for our workflow. So is there other things that we need to be looking at product-wise with all these drug shortages to be able to mitigate some of the crisis that we typically encounter? And then proactive stewardship programs. So they really go into detail about, through the opioid crisis, how do we take what we've done with the antimicrobial stewardship programs, which have been robust and have been proven to show incredible results for our patients as far as, just many things. But point being, how can we take the same processes used to develop antimicrobial stewardship programs and apply it to an opioid stewardship program? And so how can that be robust to the point where we're able to really make an impact on the community? So as far as these survey results, they were a little controversial to me when I saw the percentages, which is why I have our friend Steve Harvey here looking confused. But the main key points of this is it's not likely that 25% of health systems will discontinue drug dispensing services due to financials. So the question was, do you think that hospitals will stop drug dispensing services, which seemed kind of bizarre to me because I thought that's what pharmacies made money off of. But it turns out that at UVA we have leverage in the sense that we have 340B, we have group purchasing power, and we have other discounts in our contracts that allow us to make money on drugs. Out at small community hospitals, they don't make money on drugs, or if they do, it's barely anything, or they're actually in the red. The reason they even have the dispensing services is basically a commodity for the patient. You need to have that script to be able to be given to the patient after they leave the ED or something of that sort. So there's a lot of hospitals that actually don't make any money off dispensing services. So that was just something that I had to learn about and was a little bit of a shocker to me. So this is something I wanted to ask the audience. True, if raise your hand if you think it's true, and then again if you think it's false. Most health systems will find that regulatory requirements surrounding the use of opioid regulations seriously compromises the effective care for pain management. So if you think that's true, raise your hand. Okay. If you think it's false, raise your hand. Okay. So this was split as far as what they thought, and I think it's looking at multifactorial, but I agree with you guys on that one. As far as strategies, we talked about the primary care services that we're expanding and kind of where we need to think about and what we've already done here at UVA. PBM tactics, so we talked about patient assistance programs and things we have in place already and things we need to develop more. As far as partnering with dual registered manufacturers, so this is really understanding 503B facilities and also that are incorporated in manufacturing, and we could be here for a while talking about that. But the point is being able to have multiple avenues to receive drugs from to avoid drug shortage crises and be able to really be able to have that stability to improve supply chain and overall to increase revenue. And most of all, to be able to have drugs for our patients. As far as the next emerging topic, pharmacy and health system leadership. So they talk about leadership for the future. It's going to be less of the top-down approach, more of the rapid testing and then validation after. So being innovative, just going ahead and trying to pilot things, and if it doesn't work, we change gears, we do something different. But less of that wait for the very top-down command to be able to do piloting and really being innovative. So we need to, as pharmacists, be able to kind of be on our toes and start developing things and rolling them out. I think we do a good job here at UVA of doing that. As far as executive leadership, what they talk about here is really they use physicians as an example, but I would argue that it's just clinicians. So you're going to have more clinicians in executive leadership roles, and with that, as clinicians, we have the ability to establish stronger relationships with the C-suite and be able to really have leverage for strategic decisions and as well as clinical development decisions. And so as more clinicians are becoming in the C-suite, I think that'll be favorable to us. The next thing they talk about is workplace expectations. And so this is interesting. They talk about work-life balance and how it needs to be an issue. It's something that we've heard a lot, burnout and work-life balance. So the article talks about how the APA relabels this term work-life fit. So balance implies a zero-sum game. So for every hour of work, I get an hour of play. And in our industry or in healthcare, that's not necessarily the case. So maybe work-life fit is a better way to think about it. I know in residency, work-life fit is definitely a better way to think about it because there's just some times when you're going to be off balance, and that's okay if you're expecting that. So as far as the survey results for this, just want to highlight the key points. It is very likely that in health systems that appoint physicians to C-suite, pharmacists will gain influence in strategic and clinical decisions. And then most health systems will invest in employee leadership opportunities to improve employee engagement. So I wanted to poll the audience on this one as well. So do you believe that most pharmacy leadership development programs, including residencies, will significantly expand their training in emotional intelligence? Do you think that's true? A couple people, most people, okay. So I would agree. I think that was most of the crowd that raised their hand. And this is a book that I read, I think it's well-rounded in the fact that you have a pre-test to read the book, and you have a post-test, and it kind of just explains things like what is emotional intelligence and all the different aspects of it. So it wouldn't be too unheard of for maybe the whole department to read a book like this. I think we'd have a lot to gain, but we'll see where that goes. So as far as strategies that we haven't covered, we talked about executive leaders, engaging them. Proactive succession planning. So what this is talking about is really being able to be able to understand what a person does in a role and have processes. So if that person leaves or is ill, or for whatever reason it could be that they fall out of that position, how can someone take that position effectively in a basically a stepwise approach? Do we have those systems in place? And I think for certain positions we might, for other positions we don't. So it's just something to think about. As far as work-life fit, we talked about that, being transparent, and even work redesign. So I think for UVA, or at least the residents, they don't necessarily do redesign, but what they do is they talk about it and they provide us resources. So there's therapists. I haven't used them, but maybe I will one day, who knows, but they're there. And then you also have socials so that you can kind of meet other people that are going through similar environments and really just have those kind of resources there for you while you're going through a more intense, rigorous training. So those are kind of efforts that we're taking at UVA from the resident perspective. As far as requiring emotional intelligence training, I don't think we're there yet, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to start to explore this. How can we integrate this in the entire department where we can have some type of emotional intelligence training? And then the last one, expanding leadership to provide career, lifelong, and development training. So that kind of just works off some of our bullet points that we've talked about, but really having career ladders and development steps in every position within the pharmacy enterprise. So the next thing we want to talk about is advanced pharmacy technician roles, professionalizing pharmacy's technical workforce. So if you look in the works cited, I don't know if you can see it from there, but Raphael was one of the writers of this section, and I know it's something that he really cares about. And with the pharmacy technicians, really what we're looking at is we want to expand the pharmacist's capacity. So if the technician can operate at the top of their license, then we can operate at the top of our license. To do that, we need some things in place. Some things the article talks about is uniform standards for entry-level technicians. So with that, when we know that a technician is accredited, trained, all across the board, it's the same type of training they receive, we're able to delegate tasks that typically were part of the pharmacist and give those to the technician, and the pharmacist can be at peace of mind with that. Requiring accredited education, so only 18% of hospitals meet this for a variety of reasons. It's hard to find good technicians is really what it boils down to, and we're just not quite there with the different accredited education programs, so it's something we need to develop. Preparing technicians for advanced roles, so at UVA we have several different advanced roles for technicians. We have entry-level techs, we have lead techs, we have cross-trained techs, and there's a couple more that I'm probably forgetting, but there are different roles. As far as the new area of managing robotics as they come about, as far like the drone that I mentioned, it wouldn't surprise me if we had robots that delivered medications in the next decade. That'll probably primarily be a technician-driven job, and a pretty cool one at that. As far as technician management roles, we do that here at UVA where we have lead technicians that supervise entry-level technicians. But is there something else we could be doing, or are there multiple layers of leadership within the technician enterprise that we could develop? I'm not sure. Something we can explore. For clinical decision support, we're already doing this. So it's basically, if you think of the meds to beds tech, they're doing med histories, they are entering notes into the medical record, they are delivering medications, they are facilitating transitions of care, and also helping us with PAs, which is very helpful. And really the biggest cry we have for that is we just need more of them. So as far as the survey results for this section, the key points is very likely that 50% of health systems will require accredited education and training for new technicians in the next 4 years. It is also likely that formal accredited technician residency programs will exist. So that I am not exactly in agreement with, and I probably should have put it as somewhat likely. Excuse me, just because if you look on the right, the answers are kind of split. And with that, really what they're talking about is we put all this development and training into the residents, into the residency program. Can we take that same type of process and add it to technicians? Can we have some type of formal residency technician program that has similar components? The key points of these questions, It is not likely that a bachelor degree will be required for advanced technician roles, so thought leaders believe that's not the case. A quarter of health systems will employ AI to guide therapeutic decision making in the next 4 years. That's reasonable. Most health systems will have supervisor pharmacy technician roles. We already have that. And then 50% of health systems, technicians will collect patient info and become clinical extenders of pharmacists, and we already have that as well. In strategies, kind of recapping, the first one we've talked about, but really having a career ladder for technicians just the same way we do for pharmacists, as well as being able to collaborate with HR to make sure that they are compensated appropriately. And I know actually from developing a project with this that we actually are above the curve for our compensation of technicians. However, I think that there's other ways that we can make sure that we're ahead of the curve as well, but just something we need to be aware of to make sure that we're appropriately compensating for their valuable time. And then establishing a date by which all entry-level technicians have to be certified. We're not quite there yet, but it's definitely something that will be in the near future. And the last one there, strategies to pursue laws and regulations that change or that are needed to advance technician roles. So there have been many changes. Something that strikes me when I was reading this, I was at mid-year and went to a presentation on pharmacy technicians, and there was a director from the Board of Pharmacy from Iowa, and they passed a regulation so that their technicians could administer flu shots, and I thought that was incredible, and I thought, why can't we do that? And so, I think there's things like that I didn't even know existed that are already out there and that have already been approved are things that we need to think about, and then we need to actually put into action through our Board of Pharmacy and have laws and regulations put in place so that we're able to do things like that. As far as the next emerging trend, population health management, a community imperative. So what is population health management? We hear a lot about it. It's a comprehensive approach in providing care for patients holistically and basically looking at them beyond the hospital setting. So some things we can do to help with this: formulary standardization, having the same formulas inpatient and outpatient. It's not something that I think that we have completely set inpatient, outpatient, the same as that formulary, but something to think about. Certificate of need programs are something to think about, and what these are, basically a legislator about 40 years ago said that it's what keeps a hospital from popping up right next to you. So they basically said that healthcare facilities and places that provide healthcare for patients, they need to be dispersed in a manner that makes sense. So if two hospitals are popped up right next to each other and they're just having different patients, or they're serving the same exact patient population, they at least need to have some distance to make it more viable. And that was the intent of it. If you think about a capitalistic market, it's kind of the opposite of that, because you're not driving competition as much as maybe other industries would. And so with that, they've already had 15 states actually repeal and being successful at taking off their certificates of need. And so that's not Virginia, that's not one of them, but it's something just to keep in mind, because if that is repealed, then you have the opportunity for a hospital to pop up right next to you. And how do you plan for that? So some other things that they talk about here are health system funding of community programs, community health improvement collaborations, accountable care organizations, and I'll talk more about these in the next slide, and then end-of-life care. So there has been Medicare reimbursement in place for physicians to have the end-of-life care discussion with patients. So how can pharmacy really get into that domain? The key points of these survey questions are that medication formularies will be standardized across the continuum of care in the next 4 years. And then certificate of need, it's unclear. It was pretty much split on what will happen with certificates of need in the future. But we do know that there has been about 15 states that have repealed these. For these ones, it's split 50-50 on whether 25% of health systems will support community health programs. So that actually means taking our revenue and supporting community health programs with absolutely no incentive for us. I think UVA has programs where we have done that, but I don't know if it's something that we actively put a certain amount of our revenue towards. That was something I'd have to investigate farther. And then they claim that it is likely that 25% of competing entities will collaborate on health improvement initiatives. What that means is we'll work with Martha Jeff, we'll work with CVS, we'll work with Walgreens for some type of collaborative approach to improve population health and patients as a whole in Charlottesville. That's kind of what they're going with that. And that's something that could happen in the next 4 years. So the next question, which of the following are components of population health management? Is it A, a comprehensive approach to caring for patients beyond the acute care setting? Is it B, caring for patients during transitions at care? Is it C, care delivery that involves patient engagement and community integration? Or is it D, all the above? Going once, going twice. Good job, guys. For strategies, we talked a little bit about population health programs. Really knowing what the certificate of need is in your state and what the regulations are doing, just so you can be prepared if it's lifted in your state. And then also being able to provide programs for pharmacy staff to be able to participate in end-of-life and palliative care issues. So, some things that I can think about are having a palliative care pharmacist or a residency in palliative care. How can we really get back into that domain where we're able to be part of the hospice end-of-life palliative care issue? So the next thing we're talking about is public policy imperatives to improve medication use. So we need to address the opioid crisis. They talk about a new chronic disease emerging, and what they're really referring to is oncology diseases, oncolytic diseases that are not curable, but we are able to extend their lives for much longer than we used to be able to. So with these targeted therapies, we might not be able to cure you, but we can keep you alive for 10, 15, 20 years. So with that, there needs to be systems in place that are going to be able to follow these patients and support their care with these high expensive drugs for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And then the next thing to talk about was tough choices for scarce medications. And so do we have anything in place that says a 70-year-old gets this antibiotic versus a 90-year-old when we only have one antibiotic left? Do institutions have that? And ethically, it hasn't happened in the past, but maybe in these times of drug shortages and medications being scarce, maybe we should have policies that really line out where those medications are stratified and who gets what. So key points for these questions, naloxone will be available in most states without prescription. This has already happened. I think the last statistic I read a couple days ago was 46 states already have this in place. So this survey was done about 6 months ago, so many states have already passed this since. 50% of health systems will participate in formal opioid stewardship programs. I know we've done a lot with opioids, especially in our primary care settings. I've seen a lot of these pain contracts that are coming into play, testing for opioids, so having to take labs and drug tests and be seen by the physician, and very robust things, PMP checks, things of that nature. But a formal stewardship opioid program, I don't know if we would call it that, but it's getting there. They talk about it's likely that many hospitals will have pharmacists managing care of addiction patients. So in the next 4 years, it wouldn't be unlikely to have a pharmacist be in an addiction clinic, going over their medications, maybe even de-prescribing. So how do they get off the medications, I think, is even a bigger issue that we need to address. And most thought leaders think that this will happen. And then 50% of newly diagnosed and treated cancer patients will survive greater than or equal to 10 years. And so that's what they meant by a new chronic disease. We're going to have cancer patients that necessarily aren't treatable, but are not curable, but very treatable. So strategies for this topic. Pharmacists must act on new capabilities to aid in public health challenges. So if you're able to dispense naloxone, that's a really good opportunity to be able to talk to the patient, to be able to counsel the patient. We can do PMP checks. We can really dig into the electronic medical record to see what this patient has had in the past, and we can be good stewards of that. As far as developing opioid-focused medication stewardship programs, I kind of talked about some things at UVA we've done, but maybe having more of a rigorous stewardship program development. And then implementing programs that are able to deal with cancer patients for long term. So are we able to sustain cancer patients that are going to be able to, are going to have to come back to clinic multiple times. So we're going to have higher volumes is basically what they're talking about, which is a good thing. It's just we need to be ready for it. Developing policies that address the ethical concerns of how we ration resources. So again, how do we take the last drug that remains and who should get it ethically and realistically? It's a heated topic, and I'm from the best of my ability, I don't think we have those in place with this health system, but just something to think about. So last but not least, we're talking about coping with uncertainty and chaos, which is kind of seems to be healthcare, the healthcare trend of the last couple of years, and definitely will be this year as well. So leading in ambiguous times, we have healthcare reform initiatives that the new legislative parties have began to develop, and we have the Affordable Care Act, which they have began to try and dissolve. And so what will happen with that might change the way we practice. As far as healthcare financing, something pharmacy specific is the new USP 800 compliance. So to be USP 800 compliant, it could cost a lot of money, and especially for institutions that aren't set up for that. Because basically what the USP 800 does is it protects the employee in procuring, making, delivery, administration, and disposal of medications through the entire life cycle. And there's certain hospitals that aren't set up to meet those regulations, and it's very costly to do so. And then the last bullet there, drug costs and shortages, or drug costs and risks. Under that, we have drug shortages. We have drug prices increasing exponentially beyond inflation. We have insurance companies starting to push back on health systems, so starting to dictate what they'll reimburse, starting to drive medications to the pharmacy benefit or medical benefit, depending on what benefits them, not necessarily what benefits us. As well as you have government regulatory approvals that are going to change or already have been put in place. And then we also have 340B scrutiny. So this is something that's already affected our health system with the reimbursement cuts. And then they have programs that are looking at what we're doing with the spending of the monies that we make. And this is something that could come under farther scrutiny. So looking at these survey results, these are two questions actually I want to ask you guys. Uncertainty in healthcare financing will lead to system executives to reduce investment in 25% of new programs. Do you think that's true? Or do you think that's false? Is it false? Okay, I got one. As far as the annual number of hospital and health system bankruptcies will increase by 25%. So basically, do you guys think that it's true that 25% of hospitals will collapse their services and go bankrupt? Or do you think that's false? False, yeah. The key points of the next survey questions, basically 10% of health system spending will be unreimbursed charity care. Reduction in new drug approvals will drive 75% of health systems to expand risk stratifying formulary strategies. So when I think of that, I think of the high cost utilization committee that we made on the P&T committee recently. So with all these new target therapies and different drugs coming into play, we developed a committee to be able to look at these and figure out how we're going to bring them to our patients in a cost-effective and safe manner. It's a 50-50 split on whether life expectancy will go down by 1 year. That was a random statistic they threw in there. And then 50-50 split on whether 50% of states will loosen regulations related to pharmacy practice. So basically, the thought leaders are split on the idea that about half the states would actually loosen regulations on pharmacy. And personally, I don't see that happening, but we will see what happens in 2018. As far as question 3, which of the following areas is impacting health system pharmacy? We have 340B reimbursement changes, B, drug shortages, D, drug cost rising, or C, drug cost rising, or D, insurance company reimbursement changes, or E, all the above. Good job, guys. So strategies that we haven't talked about. The first one here, basically, in times of uncertainty and chaos, focus on the basics. So what do you make money at? Focus on that, optimize that. And so as far as cell compounding, automated dispensing of medications, optimal inventory management, things that we can control is basically what they're talking about. Foster a pharmacy culture of constant assessment of value. So does the patient need this medication? Or is it something that we can peel off, not necessarily for money's sake, but just for the patient's sake? And if it happens to save money, well, that's a good thing. Engaging in health system government relations team to oppose federal and state legislation that allows for drug price inflation. So knowing who your politicians are, knowing who you're voting for and what they stand for. Do they want to side with pharma to do different things that could raise healthcare or raise drug costs? Or do you vote for people who have platforms that say they're going to go against pharma? And then how does that pan out once they're in office? Look at those things and be able to kind of be part of that decision by voting, and then also by being part of policy and advocacy. So don't lose sight of the continuum of care. So basically in times of uncertainty and budget cuts and things like that, try not to lose like the vision of population health management and other things that we're not quite there yet. Just stay, basically the article talks about just staying active on the things you can control, and don't lose vision of innovative ideas. And then use the chaos for your advantage to quickly seize and implement new business strategies. It kind of speaks for itself. So just to recap, I've already talked about a lot of this, but this is only UVA. This is basically the quick run through of the UVA pharmacy forecast and some things that I'm aware that we're doing, and I'm sure we're doing much more. So we're going to go over these different areas: optimization of prior auths, coordination, billing integrity, discharge medication delivery service, and then expanding to the high volume non-patient areas, and expanding prior auths to all clinics. And so optimization of prior authorizations. So the problem is we have a lot of write-offs. I know in the oncology world we deal with this a lot, and I'm sure in other sections we do too. I'm just most familiar with that area. And with that, really it's just a sheer number of PAs coming in and not enough bandwidth or not enough personnel to be able to process those PAs. We're losing millions of dollars. If we can have the resources obtained, which we already have them obtained, they're in the process of onboarding and training, the impact will be millions of dollars. Looking at billing integrity, so along those same lines, not being able to process PAs, there's also dark clouds around some of the reimbursement structure and where the monies go throughout the health system. We don't even see some of these things. It's dealt with by a separate department, and it gets very complex. But the problem is our systems and work processes do not sync or are not conducive to tracking charges through a scheduling visit. What we need is a billing analyst, and it's what we've asked for. And they'll be able to go in and look at different drugs and what we've actually been able to bill for. And even just looking at one drug alone, that would give us $500,000. If you look at a total opportunity of multiple drugs, it's millions of dollars. For discharge medication delivery, expansion to high volume non-patient areas. So currently we're expanding to multiple floors, and I think we're on 7 or 8 floors now. And I could be off by a couple, but we are expanding. I know I'm right there. And as far as the resources needed, we need technicians to expand to other areas such as the SSU, TCH. And in the TCH alone, the health plan could save upwards of $750,000. Goals for 2018, we want to build the Northridge Pharmacy. We want to have remote clinic pharmacy services, and we want to have a Riverside Pharmacy, all which will bring in great revenue. Goals for expansion of fiscal year 19, central field pharmacy and central sterile compounding pharmacies are all under review. All those business plans are under review. So that's just some quick things that we're doing at UVA to try and generate some rapid revenue. The take-home message here, healthcare landscape is changing. All pharmacists have a role, and they can be a vital part in this change to position the pharmacy to be successful with this change. We can design and implement new pharmacy services, and health system is a business in which we must always put the well-being of our customers, which are our patients, at the forefront of every decision. And what questions do you have for me? I had to put this picture up. I know. I apologize. All right. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you hanging there with me.